think the way we did this the other day is we just sort of like, we set these up as a chance for TAC members who joined us last week or who couldn't to kind of ask questions and give some comments and stuff like that. But on Wednesday, similarly, there are a lot of friends joining, so no reason not to have this be a little bit more a free-flowing conversation as we go through. Although, Greg, I know you said the other day, there we got you now, sir. Greg, you were going to come back with a few ideas and stuff, so I do want to give some space for you as we go through this. But anyway, let me turn it over to Annie to officially kick us off. If you saw as you came on, this is being recorded and we'll post these on our portal, our project portal.
Thanks so much, Trey. I think you've done a great job kicking us off already. But really glad to have everyone here today. We've set up these kind of TAC lunch sessions as an opportunity to continue the conversation that the TAC had at their meeting last Thursday. We moved forward with that meeting knowing that there were a lot of other events happening around the state that day. So we just wanted to give some more opportunity for conversation this week. So these are open public meetings. Great to see a lot of faces here today. As Trey said, we've been really approaching these kind of working lunch sessions pretty flexibly to see who shows up and who's available. So as we did on Wednesday this week, I think there will be opportunity above and beyond just the public comment we have at the end of the meeting for folks to engage and participate. But before we start with any of that, I think we should just go around and do some quick introductions. I think we're a small enough group that we can all just introduce ourselves. I'm happy to start. I'm Annie Decker. I work at VHCB, and I've been really involved, especially in the phase 2 part of this Act 59 process as we're working on drafting a conservation plan. And maybe I'll hand it off to Greg, who's next on my screen.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Gastina. I work on the Green Mountain National Forest, and I'm a staff officer, so I oversee a number of different program areas on the forest.
Thanks, Greg. Maybe Gwen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Gwen Zakoff, and I do government relations and advocacy for the Vermont Forest Products Association.
Thanks, Gwen. And I'm just going to go in the order on my screen. So Trey, you're up next.
Everybody, I'm Trey Martin. You can see from the words on the screen there, I work at VHCB with Annie and Isaac and work as the Director of Conservation here.
And how about Kelly?
Yes, hi, Kelly Stetner. I run a volunteer group called Black River Action Team in Windsor County, and I'm also the district manager for the Ottaquechee Conservation District.
And Sarge, you're up.
Bill Sargent from Shaftesbury, Vermont, semi-retired forester, author of 50 Years of Dirt Forester, and a member of the Vermont Forest Products Association.
Great. Bob?
Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Zano, an ecologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department.
Thanks, Bob. Isaac, I know you're at an event, so I'll give you a second to jump in if you'd like to. I see you're off mute.
Sure. Hey, I'm Isaac. I am the Conservation Stewardship Director at VHCB, and I've been working on Act 59 with Annie and Trey and others.
Thanks, Isaac. And Gunnar, same to you. I understand you're traveling, maybe not able to get on. All right. So how about Helen? I think you're up next.
Hi, I'm Helen Wagenvord, and I'm a consultant, and I'm providing some support for the development of the Vermont Conservation Plan, and I'm just off camera while I'm finishing lunch.
Thanks, Helen. Zach?
Hi, everybody. Also off camera while I scarf some lunch down. I'm the executive director of Standing Trees based in Montpelier. And I was just putting in the chat, but I'll ask it here. It would be great to know, just as I'm getting to know who's on the technical advisory committee, who among the people in the room here is on the TAC versus our members of the public. And I'll just say I'm a member of the public here and grateful for the chance to watch. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Zach. I just to clarify, I believe Greg is actually our only TAC member who is here present today. I think everyone else is either staff at VHCB or ANR or support, as in Helen's case, or members of the public. Yeah, public and quasi-public. Thanks, Gwen. And I see Kenneth's iPhone. You're up.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Ken Gagne Lumber here in Pittsford, Vermont. We run a family sawmill just north of Rutland. We also have quite a number of acres in woodlands throughout Vermont. So we're kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of the forest products industry. And I'm a member of VFPA as well, and glad to make the meeting.
Thanks so much, Ken. Well, I'm really glad to see some people are acting on the working lunch part of the title of this meeting. Very good. So I think with that, Trey, would you like to kind of do a little, we're going to do a very quick update on kind of where things stand with the project, what to expect over the next few months, and then we'll work our way through some exercises, through some opportunities to be in dialogue together. And Trey is sharing his screen. All right, we see your screen, Trey.
Things to drag and click and move and all that, but I'm here now, and I'm glad that it's nice we have a few new people. So I am going to take this first section of this. We sort of planned this conversation today to give a couple of updates, and then to kind of give an opportunity for more conversation, questions, and comments around the themes that we talked about in our larger in-person TAC meeting last week. And those were kind of the, what people are bringing to this, their hopes, expectations, and visions for a successful implementation of Act 59, a discussion about the scope, or even more precisely, VHCB has presented some material that says, hey, here's how we're reading the law in terms of the scope of recommendations we're supposed to provide. So we started a conversation about that. And then we started a conversation about how we take the framework that is currently on our website, which it's organized around objectives and pathways to move towards the goals and vision of the Act. It has 3 broad objectives, each of which is broken down into 4 or 5 strategic pathways. The next part of planning is to put actions in there. And then the final part of planning is to prioritize those actions as we pursue the goals for 2030 and for 2050, as well as things that lie outside those goals that are part of the vision, or things that uphold other related plans and initiatives in Vermont. So that's how we're thinking about the organization. We'll come back to all of that as we go, but wanted to provide that as framework. As we go along today, we'll have a chance to kind of stop and linger in those themes as you all see fit. And of course, we're going to ask Greg and friends from ANR sort of like for initial reactions, but then as we go, just kind of build time for other members of the stakeholder community who are here today to just kind of comment as we go. But we will try to stop at 12:50 in case anybody has like a prepared remark they want to share. So with that, here's some just upcoming dates that we wanted to make you aware of. We're just about done with the first point there. We're in the second working lunch this week. We've sent out a doodle poll, or Annie has sent out a doodle poll to the TAC and ANR colleagues to try and find dates. The best date at the end of the week of December 15th for another longer in-person TAC meeting, the last one of this calendar year. It'll be in Montpelier and it'll be open to the public. But we're trying to pick a time either Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, or Friday morning that week that works for the most people on the advisory group. In January, February, and March, we're going to be continuing to work on what I was just describing, which is really developing and then sharing with the public this set of actions that we think, as a draft or a initial proposal for comment, that we think flesh out that framework that we've developed. But right now we're trying to finish our work on the framework and really understand the context to get into that. But yes, in January and March, it's sort of doing more regional listening sessions to hear from people, having some ability for sort of targeted, sort of sector-specific conversations among colleagues in the forest products sector, or among colleagues in the advocacy community, or among colleagues in, who do governmental work on conservation, among land trusts, that we can organize some focus groups like that and support them with some funding and facilitation support. And then we'll have the TAC meeting during that time, obviously. At the end of the spring, that's when we get into that final piece I described, which is how do we prioritize? What are the actions we recommend go first, second, third on the way to 2030 and 2050? And then we're still hoping to turn this in. Our recommendations for the General Assembly's consideration, they'll have to take them up and debate them and authorize them or fund them as needed. So that's really moves it back into the legislative realm. So that's where we're headed. Where we went next in the conversation last week was sort of how do we envision success. But before I hand it back to Annie, who will sort of talk through that set of questions, does anybody have any questions, technical questions or logistical questions about when we're meeting next and when people can come and visit?
Is there a comment period for the draft that was issued that's open now? Is that what I hear? Is there an initial?
Yeah, it is still open.
Okay.
And we're really want to get considered comments back from people. So let us know, Gwen, if you need any help accessing stuff or what would be most helpful.
So is it the 28th that you're looking at? Just in timing? Okay. Just wanted to get verification on that.
Yep.
And again, yeah, go ahead, Annie.
I was just going to say, I'm going to drop a link into the chat right now that links directly to the framework report. And there's ways to leave comments right through the project portal. And that deadline has been extended through to November 28th. But as Trey said, if anyone's really pressed for time or needing more time or feeling like, just stay in contact with us. We want to make sure, people do have the opportunity to weigh in the ways that they can. But that
we do have a deadline because we want to be able to organize the feedback the TAC's given us over the last couple of weeks and the comments. We have a December TAC meeting, so we need a couple of days to kind of pull out the themes and aggregate the ideas that we've heard and do that. So as much as possible, we'd love for people to get it, knowing that you'll see a next round of the plan kind of iterated with actions, and it'll be more opportunity to comment there, and then more opportunity to comment on the implementation matrix at the end. So this is like a sort of a 3-part process. Anyway, anybody else have a question? All right, Annie, let me hand this off to you then to talk a little bit about what we mean by envisioning success.
Thanks, Trey. So this is again kind of following along the pattern and the flow that we used when the TAC met last Thursday, and again kind of similar to what we worked through on Wednesday of this week. But really, kind of before we dig into anything else related to the specific language of the act, how we're proposing structuring this plan, how we can start thinking about actions, we wanted to take a step back as a group and go through this visioning exercise together to talk through just different ways to think about what might success or outcomes look like at the end of this planning process, and use that as some kind of a guidepost as we work through the work of actually drafting this plan. So we posed a few questions to TAC members, and we'll share those out again today. They're on the screen. In a minute, we'll drop the presentation. I'll put the questions in the chat, and we'll kind of just open up for a few minutes of dialogue together as a group. But these questions are, if you're feeling optimistic about the Vermont Conservation Plan, what do you imagine it can accomplish for Vermont or for the communities that you represent? Also consider, what would it look like if the plan truly meets its vision and goals for your work, for the work that you do for your organizations that you might represent, for the communities that you serve, and what do you hope that this plan makes possible? So in terms of flow for today, we'd love to hear from Greg as our TAC member who's here. I think it would be great to hear from especially ANR staff, who we haven't had a chance to have that direct dialogue in these meetings yet, but I do think we'll have a few minutes to open this up to others who are here today who might want to speak to this question as well. We're a small enough group. We're trying to cover a lot in a short window, but I do think we're a small enough group, and we would love to open that up. So thank you, Trey, for putting the questions in the chat. So Greg, if you'd like to kick us off, if you want to speak to these questions, I know you've kind of seen these, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'll just be really brief, and kind of based on what we talked about last week with the TAC. I think one of the key things that I see for the forest, for the Green Mountain Forest, that this plan could provide and help with is the connectivity. I know there was a lot of talk about connectivity, ecological connectivity among different areas of the state. There is a lot of north-south connectivity, but there's certainly some barriers to wildlife and things like that. And then certainly as you get to river valleys and whatnot, there's a lot of private lands. And so I think that the discussion about agriculture that's come up has been really good, to talk a lot more about private lands and how people can stay economically viable in their communities and provide maybe corridors for wildlife and ecological movement. The other thing I was going to say is the Forest Service has a legacy program. It's a funding program, and I was looking at the map, and I'll drop into a link to that into the chat here. There's a lot of parcels in Vermont that have been funded out of that. And so I know we talked a little bit about how is this going to be funded? There's already been a lot funded. Hopefully we'll be able to continue to fund these through the federal government, through this legacy program. And I think having a plan and having a vision really helps when you go and ask for funding, especially at the federal level. So that's it for me. That's all I want to say.
Thanks so much, Greg. Really, really appreciate that feedback. And thank you for dropping that link in the chat. Bob, do you have anything that you might want to speak to related to these questions? Bob Zano is here with ANR as well.
Sure. I'm a little off the cuff here, so bear with me on that, but
Totally fine for everyone.
Not quite as cohesive as Greg's excellent comments. Looking at it through like the lens of Vermont conservation design and the idea that Fish and Wildlife has done this work, it has identified a lot of the landscape as being ecologically important, way more than can be permanently conserved, or really probably should be permanently conserved. We should be using the whole conservation toolbox to think about how we maintain ecological function, plants and animals, healthy forests, and all those benefits. And I think one of the things I'm excited about is being able to narrow down where permanent land conservation is really the appropriate tool. And some of those places like connectivity zones. Where do we think about different types of forest structure being developed across the landscape, and how can we bring that down to a more narrow, specific focus so that it's really a complementary vision rather than a push-pull of trying to do everything everywhere. And I think that's what I'm excited about. And then lastly, I think really being able to look at how maintaining ecological function can overlap with all of Vermont's social and economic goals, and how those can again be sort of thought of holistically and complementary, so that if we're doing things like trying to conserve land in more parts of the state, how does that also coincide with maybe trying to make public land or conserved land available to people in those regions so that it can be appreciated? And I think really having the opportunity to do that is really exciting. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So much, Bob. Pretty great off the cuff comments, I'll say. Thank you for that. I think at this point, I'd like to open it up to anyone else who might like to share their insights and their thoughts, reflections on these questions on Thursday last week. We had a lot more time to kind of sit with the questions and think through them. So I know it's a quick turnaround here, and we do encourage if you reflect on these questions and have more that you'd like to add after the fact, please reach out to us. That's totally appropriate to send along after the fact in an email to Trey or I or Isaac, who are here on the VHCB team. But would anyone like to speak to those comments or have any contributions that they'd like to add related to these questions? Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, I put this in chat already, but if somebody would speak to, I was on a call with Jens Hilke some time ago, and I brought this question up, and it never really got answered to my satisfaction. So just thinking there's one solar installation in particular in Ludlow that's enormous, and they've taken over quite a large swath of productive ag land and cut down a large amount of what looked to be fully functional forested habitat at the headwaters of a couple of really nice little brook trout streams, and installed hundreds of solar panels and fenced it all off. And they're not really managing for stormwater from what I can see on my occasional trips up there. And I'm just curious how that factors into the conservation conversation, if you will.
It's a good question, and Annie, I'm happy to start an answer, and I also welcome Bob or others to weigh in. A lot of experts on the screen here, actually, but so my first, like the boring answer, Kelly, is that the Act 59 statute doesn't ask us to comment on the overlap of renewable energy generation or energy transmission with conservation. So it doesn't ask us to plan for places to do that necessarily, and it doesn't ask us to conserve, to be especially protective against that sort of development. So it's silent as to that overlap. But I think at A&R, the programs that Bob is part of, as well as the folks in FPR, weigh in on all those projects and do highlight the ecological risks of certain types of development. So there certainly is, that's always present. And I do think that the other thing, Zach Porter, thanks Bob and Greg for their comments. Annie did as well. And I wanted to say that, both of you really got us going on a nice tone today, because you really did focus in on, like, with this plan, we want to talk about the actions that we take that where permanent conservation should be. And I do think the places that are irreplaceable if they were to be developed, or where if we protect them, we can enhance and restore them. Places that are productive in terms of agriculture and silviculture, those are places that we see being really important to work with public and private sort of landowners to protect those. And so I think that the net effect would hopefully be that we would be protecting headwaters areas and prime ag soils and productive forest, interior forest, special natural communities. But it's not, it doesn't specifically call out the threats of sprawl or the threats of energy development or road development. I think it's sort of saying, what are the most important places to protect through this particular mechanism?
I appreciate
Talked
that.
for way too long. I'm sorry.
No, it does feel like a lot to untangle. It just keeps coming back to me of the as we're looking at, it almost feels in my head like we're siloed. We're talking about this act, this goal, this legislation, and then that overall plan, and they all really come back to, where does water go? When water falls out of the sky, it's going somewhere, and we need to protect our communities, but we also need to protect our wetlands because they're sponges on the landscape, so we don't have to replace all this infrastructure. And then if we're going to develop, how are we going to get the infrastructure to the communities? And it just feels like the infrastructure portion seems to be sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And I just want to see it all kind of mesh together, where all the different programs and plans and legislations and efforts are all working within the same sort of a framework. So it just feels a little siloed to me. So thanks for letting me rant about that.
No, we
Yeah.
appreciate that. We hear that a lot, and we do want to try and acknowledge where I mean, we don't want this plan to try and control other plans, or think that this plan is somehow like the master ring or something. What we want from this is to uphold other work with permanent conservation and land protection and stewardship. So how do we help communities do planning and integrated planning? I think the regional planning commissions might be the place where bringing all that together needs to happen. But I see another hand up, so I'm going to pass this along. But thank you for that, Kelly.
Yeah, Zach, if you'd like to speak, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see everybody. It's great to have so much participation in the meeting, and thank you again, Trey and Annie, for providing this opportunity. I actually just wanted to, in addition to saying again, thank you to Bob and Greg for great comments earlier. In response to Kelly's question, I think that Act 59 does deal with those issues that you were just raising, Kelly, in the sense that the permanent conservation that is a required part of implementing Act 59 would not be inclusive of lands cannot count towards those goals and have development like you were just describing. So the Act 59 conservation plan is not prescriptive. It doesn't say here is where there's going to be, it can't by fiat say this is going to be this land management and this is going to be that land management. That's not how it works, obviously. But what it can say is these are areas that we're prioritizing for things other than solar development or wind turbines or strip malls or what have you. And so a good conservation plan outcome here would be, in my opinion, even adding more clarity for Vermont. Where does it make sense to have renewable energy, and where does it not make sense? Where does it make sense to have housing development, and where does it not make sense? But to Bob's point, there are some pieces of the implementation here that will be non-permanent conservation, other mechanisms. But for the pieces that are permanent, those cannot include the solar development that you were just describing. So we do have to start making judgment calls about where that's appropriate and where it's not. And Act 59 can help us to guide that development to the right location. So I do think that I hope it's not too siloed. I mean, it's not going to accomplish everything that I think you're kind of dreaming of or asking for, but I hope that it helps to solve the problem and is a part of the solution.
Thanks, Zach. That was a better, clearer way of saying what I was trying to say, which is that it doesn't ask us about that, but good conservation planning will ultimately focus on where it's important to protect. So yes, thank you. What about anybody else? Yeah, Kenneth?
So I'm kind of new to this conversation, although it's definitely affects me. Our family has been in Vermont since 1880. We've been actively part of the working landscape since that point. My great-grandfather started a farm here. And I kind of feel like we've been pretty good stewards over this last 140 years. And we overall have north of 1,000 acres that we manage and take care of. And the concern that I have is over these 140 years, I would say that my lands are conserved with a small c. But in this whole act, in this plan, I am not shown any credit for that if you're trying to get percentages and all sorts of things like that. And it does concern me that those of us, and I'm in the current use program, I think that's another important thing that this committee needs to take into consideration and count our lands, even though I don't have a forever document that says my land is this, but for the last 140 years, we've been doing it, and I think we should deserve credit for it. And I don't think we should be, how you say, protected when I think we're already doing a pretty good job of protecting the resources we have. And the last thing I'll say is that I think it's important that we in Vermont take care of our forests. It's a key thing. The other thing is that we all use wood in everything we do. And the focus has been, how can we do the best job we can? Here in Vermont and New England, we need to realize that we are actually net importers of wood products from other parts of the world. We are not self-sufficient. And I think that's an important thing to take in consideration. And I have great concerns about the Big C conservation plan. I think it's definitely I have concerns about that, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I have lots of thoughts, but I wonder if anybody else wants to build on Kenneth's comments before we respond or sort of see if there's any other topics.
I'll take a little stab at it.
Thanks, Sarge, and welcome, Bill. We didn't get to hear your introduction, but
Bill Sargent, I'm a 50-plus year forester graduate from the University of Vermont. Live down here in Shaftesbury, and actually just finished up writing a book about my career as a forester called 50 Years of Dirt Forester, and have done a bunch of speaking engagements down here. But anyways, my comment to build on Ken was when I moved to Bennington County from up in Washington County, north of Montpelier, in 1974, there was 10 pretty major sawmills in Bennington County and 3 major furniture manufacturers. And I'm writing a piece about the disappearance of sawmills in Bennington County. And during that time period, the U.S. Forest Service began buying property across Bennington County. And currently Bennington County, if my numbers that I was given from the Forest Service are correct, is 42% owned. Bennington County is 42% owned by the U.S. Forest Service. And my concern is that, and let me back up, every one of those sawmills in that time period and every one of those furniture manufacturers are now gone. The Forest Service was an extremely active, vibrant community when I first moved down here, selling timber. It was great for those little sawmills depended on the logs from the Forest Service. Those big furniture manufacturers depended on the lumber from those little mills. And as the Forest Service gradually has slowed their timber harvest, it squeezed those little mills out. Not the only reason, but it was a major reason. And I'll wrap up my comments there. Not only did it had a huge economic impact to Bennington County, it had a big impact on wildlife, and it's not all good. I'll say that. And I want to just, my reason for speaking is to warn the rest of the state that there is possibly too much of a good thing, public land. And if it's managed actively, I have no problem with it, but there's a huge economic impact. And there was to Bennington County, and I just want to warn it as a possible bellwether for the rest of the state of Vermont. We need to move cautiously. Thank you.
Bill. And the other Bill, put your hand up, and we didn't get to hear your introduction, Bill Sayer. Were you going to say something additional to Ken and Bill Sargent, or I'd love to give Greg and Bob a chance to respond as well, because there are a couple points that came up, I think, that are worthy of addressing. But go ahead, my friend.
Thank you, Trey. I appreciate the opportunity. I'd like to build on both what Ken Gagnon and Bill Sargent had to say. The first would be to call into question the definition of conservation. It seems to me that there's no doubt in my mind that the use value land should count towards whatever goals we set, whether they be aspirational or regulatory or mandatory. And why would I say that? I would point to the percentage of use value lands that get converted to development or some other use. I don't know the details, but I'm going to figure it's less than 1%. And 99 plus percent that's not converted seems pretty close to being permanent to me. And I think, just as Bill Sargent was saying, we want to be careful when we develop public policy of this kind or any kind about consciousness of unintended consequences. We want to be careful that the goal to reach the perfect does not damage the good. And before I'd explain what I mean by that, I'd call into question whether a government ownership or conservation easements themselves are, in the long run, and that's what you're talking about when you use the word permanent, really more permanent than use value has been. Because it's always possible that a law can be changed and easements can be undone, repurchased, or overridden by legislation. It's happened before, and it certainly can happen. And if there's anything that we've learned in our experiences in the past few years, particularly with the pandemic, it is that there's almost nothing that's permanent. And that would include any legislative or regulatory construct. So that's my first and most important point, that the definition of conservation is flawed. It should certainly include use value appraisal lands as, for practical purposes, just as permanent as land or easements that are owned by government or even by a non-government entity.
Thank you, Bill. Can I reflect back what
Sure.
I think I heard, a few things I heard, and then I thought there was a couple of points that Greg or Bob might want to address, and but I did hear you asking about, the role of use value appraisal, and we're not alone in raising that in this question. That's a really well documented question within our work. I heard questions about oversubscription or over conservation of certain parts of the state, and that's something that, throughout this, A&R has maintained a goal to be more diversified in its approach to public acquisition, not just up and down the north and south of the Greens. And then there were some questions about the Forest Service's management and sort of the timber productivity of those lands. So I'm sure we just touched off a lot of really interesting topics, and we can continue to linger here with others' questions, but they want to pause for colleagues to say anything more if they want to.
I can come on really quick, Trey, and just I don't know that I have full answers. I certainly appreciate, Sarge, that you have the breadth of history that you have, and that's really helpful to get that perspective of what was happening, where we're at now, and what's changed in between. And I think Bill and you both brought up, we can't rely on just one way to meet our conservation goals. I think there's multiple different methods in that. Public land is one of them, and there's good and bad on that. Obviously, I support the public land concept, but I also see many other excellent ways of conserving land, and I think a lot of landowners do a great job and are really thoughtful about what they're doing. And Bill, as you mentioned, nothing is permanent. In human society, we do move on, but I do think that this plan can help to identify ways to go in the future, and maybe hold our political folks, give them something to say, we really want to move this direction. But I think that there's a lot of opportunities in the development of this plan, to answer some of those points that you made. That's all I've got, Trey.
Well, thank you. I was looking to see if Bob Zeno wanted to comment any further.
I certainly agree that nothing is permanent. And in the phase 1 process, when a bunch of us looked at those categories of conservation, I mean, everything's got cracks and permanency. Looking at the landscape, to like the broader question about UVA and permanently conserved lands, I think that they really depend on one another. And if you look at the areas that Fish and Wildlife through Vermont Conservation Design has identified as highest priority forest across the state, a lot of the forest, because we know that Vermont's a forested state and we benefit in so many ways from that. Of those highest priority areas, something like a third of it is in permanent conservation, that's public land and private land. Another third of it is enrolled in UVA. So there's equal contributions of UVA and permanent conservation there. And then another third of those acres, it has neither of those conditions on it. And I think it really speaks to, we have the wildlife, the plants and animals here, in part because of UVA over time. It's what's holding the cores of conserved land, maybe not a good word, but the islands of conserved land are connected by this working landscape in UVA. And I think that's so important.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I sit on the Conservation Commission in my town of Calais, and we were looking at a map for our select board of what's conserved versus what's conserved and protected through UVA. And the vast majority of Calais, maybe 60 or 65% is in UVA or conserved, but it's the vast majority of that is UVA. So I think we see that in a lot of communities. And are interested in the role of UVA and how we structure recommendations around other programs that are equally valid and important and deserve attention. And also how, again, where and how does it make sense to invest public or private money in an easement that goes into the land records, which, could a public legislature overturn how the land records go? It's an interesting question, Bill. I sort of feel like things in the land records are there while the rule of law holds. Things that are stewarded well by families are there as long as families have the resources they need. So we want to put our emphasis in both directions, in terms of how we recommend going forward. But yes, I was just going to say, is there anybody else who want to join this? And I think we're just going to stay on this topic until we break at 12:50 to see if anybody has final comments from the public, because we're here to hear from you. Zach, go ahead.
Thanks. A concern that we've had from the beginning of the implementation of Act 59 is that there's been a lot of focus on the what you might call the quantitative goals, the percentage of Vermont that meets the definition of conserved in the legislation. But it's not just a quantitative goal. Those goals are also qualitative. They have to do with the way that lands are managed. And so something that I don't think has come up in the recent public meetings or publicly accessible versions of these TAC meetings is the importance of the definition of sustainable land management in the legislation, and among the other qualitative descriptions in the definitions. But one thing that I think needs to be dealt with to a greater degree than it was in the inventory as the conservation plan comes together is what types of land management meet that sustainable land management definition. And as has been previously raised, there's issues around right now, the counting of certain agricultural lands that don't meet the definition of sustainable land management, or the Vermont conservation design description of what types of agricultural lands serve the ecologically functional landscape. But in terms of forest management, it's also important for us to look at that definition. And, I was just on land. I haven't had a chance to visit with Mr. Sayer about this, but just the other day, without even intending to, I was on the Les Newell Wildlife Management Area with a colleague of mine who lives just downstream. And the Les Newell Wildlife Management Area is one of a number of wildlife management areas owned by the people of Vermont, but with exclusive timber rights owned by A. Johnson Timber Company. And so there is no competition for the wood. There is no land management plan for the Les Newell, 6,000 acres. That's a large area in the Chattagay, No-Town vicinity. And so is it what is giving the public the certainty, looking at the definitions that are required parts of Act 59, that, for example, the Les Newell Wildlife Management Area is managed according to the definitions in the legislation? And maybe it is, but I'm just asking the question right now, because again, there's no management plan, and A&R admits as much on A&R's website. And there are exclusive timber rights to one company on public land. So I want to just highlight that, these are important issues that are the kinds of things that could be dealt with, should be dealt with in the conservation plan. There are other wildlife management areas where A. Johnson and perhaps other companies have exclusive rights. What assurances do we have that these definitions that are in the plan for conserved, for sustainable land management are being met?
Well, that sounds like an invitation to respond.
Yeah, I was gonna, Bill, before you jump in, I was gonna do two things. One is I was gonna ask if anybody wants to respond, and you've got the mic next, friend. But I also wanted to point out that we're at 12:50, and if we were running this in a normal meeting fashion, we would have been talking to Greg the whole time, and then now we'd pause for public comment. But unless anybody objects, we've already kind of waived that distinction today. I'm just gonna let this conversation finish. And then, Bill, if you could try to respond in 2 or 3 minutes. I also want to see if anybody else has any other final comments or questions. Because it'd be great to just get back around the circle here before we say goodbye.
Thank you, Trey.
Really quick though, I do have to drop off in about 5 minutes. I have a presentation to give at 1, so I'm going to listen in for a little bit and then I'll sneak out.
Okay.
Thanks, Kelly. It was good to meet you today.
Thank you. Of course, we do have a management plan for that land, as we do for all of our land. And I'll put the quality of our management up against any managed forest land in the state of Vermont or anywhere in the country. And that can be confirmed by looking at the quality of the stands there today, and by talking with people who are familiar with it in both the state and federal government, who've familiar with it over the past several decades. As to the price, we, I think, sold that land to the state of Vermont, the fee simple portion, for $1 an acre. That was a pretty good deal, Zach, then and now. And if you want to factor in inflation, you could do the same with most any conservation easement or purchase. Look at the price that was paid 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, and most of this land was sold almost 60 years, more than 60 years ago. You'll see that it was a very, very good price. And the state of Vermont and the people of Vermont have gotten a pretty good deal. And frankly, you make my point, and I'll try to be brief, and that's to build on Bill Sargent's point that there are other benefits that come from working landscape that are not necessarily calculated in the conservation measurement. There's the habitat for of young forest that is crucially important to a wide spectrum of wildlife, at least at some portion in its life cycle. The snowshoe hare, the white-tailed deer, the ruffed grouse, all depend on that early succession habitat. And that amount of habitat is so small in Vermont and actually throughout New England that it's in danger of collapse. And the last point I'd make is that the cultural and societal benefits that come from a working landscape. Bill Sargent mentioned the thriving rural community in Bennington County that was dependent on the harvest of wood, and in the early days, the Forest Service was a big part of contributing to that community. But there's the local civic organizations, every group from the Boy Scouts to the 4-H and the Little League depend on people who earn their living on the working lands. And when the resource base is drastically reduced or disappears, you lose that cultural benefit too. And the evidence is very clear that when land transfers from private ownership, forest land, to government ownership, that its productivity declines. So there's so many benefits that are part of a working forest, particularly one that is 99% long-lasting, as long-lasting as government ownership. The loss of those benefits when the land passes from use value appraisal to government ownership is something that should be part of this equation and part of this discussion.
Thanks, Bill. Nice to have you here today. Anybody who hasn't talked in a bit, Kelly, you're about to drop off, so you get the mic.
And I'll make it really, really quick. Bill, thank you for your comments about productivity. That was important to me, especially considering my conservation district hat. I was curious if, and this might be something that maybe I'll check the recording for everybody's responses afterward, but thinking about permanent conservation of lands, I know a big point of contention that I've come across in talking with people about river buffers, for example, 25 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet river buffers. Oh no, it's a hands-off area. It's going to get full of invasive plants. Who's going to be able to, you can't go in and manage it. It's got to be hands-off. And then we have Oriental bittersweet tearing down all the trees within a matter of years, or thickets of some of the more aggressive introduced invasive plants. And without any kind of management of that, that becomes a nightmare that's impossible to manage. So yeah, I do have to drop off, but I wanted to, pardon the pun, drop that seed and see if anybody wanted to make comments, and I'll check the recording for that afterward, if that's okay.
Sure, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, Greg or Bob, do you have any comments?
I mean, I could chime in really quickly about buffers, Trey, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Isaac. I didn't see you pop on screen.
Yeah, no worries. It's buffers are often hands-off for management, but they're always going to allow for the maintenance for like invasive species, things like that. It's mostly going to be a hands-off to like agricultural type management, but you can most often even manage for forestry values as well within the context of the laws. But certainly the buffers usually don't restrict that type of management, and invasives definitely is allowed.
Yeah, I was going to say most publicly funded easements I've ever seen, or I can't remember a publicly funded easement that wouldn't allow for invasives management within a buffer or even a designated area for ecological protection or what have you. But yeah, Greg or Bob.
I just wanted to go back really quick to Zach's comments because I think that they really misrepresented the way that the ownership of a WMA with timber rights works, and Zach sort of made it sound like there was something nefarious going on. And just really want to emphasize it's just the way that you split the rights. And Fish and Wildlife chose for a while to buy land without timber rights as a way to protect it from other forms of use. And that was a decision the department made. Same as this, you can split out rights for a conservation easement. And so it's just another way of addressing property rights. Nothing more to say about that.
Anyone else? All right, I'm gonna Zach, I see you off screen or off mute.
Yeah.
I was gonna say if you be very quick, I'm gonna actually put my slide deck up just to look at one slide before we finish. But Zach, if you can be 1 minute and then I'll do this, and then we'd love to hear from everybody in writing.
Yeah, I guess I'll just comment and say there's a lot of different ways of defining productivity. And 90% of our state lands are in forested headwaters. That has a unique value. Our public lands on average in New England store 1/3 more carbon than private lands. That discrepancy is even greater when you compare public lands to timberlands that are used primarily for economic productivity purposes. So it is really important to take all these things into consideration. And again, the most important thing I can say here is that, and really, I mean, I would hope VHCB or ANR would come in to say this, and it wouldn't have to be me saying it, is that Act 59 includes space for all of these uses, right? Act 59 includes space for actively managed timberlands and for other forms of conservation, ecological reserves, biodiversity conservation areas to a greater degree than we've employed them in the past. And it leaves plenty of space on the map beyond what Act 59 would ever include that could continue to be used as industrial forest land or what have you. So there is really no exclusivity here. Act 59 tries to make sure that for a certain percentage of the landscape, there's a rebalancing that goes on of conservation. But everybody has a place under that tent. And so I think it's important that these things aren't pitted against each other, but that Act 59 is actually used to make sure that we're practicing the right types of land management in the right places. What's going to get us what we need biodiversity wise, resilience wise. How do we make sure that we're wise with how we are leveraging different parts of our landscape? So there's no choice here between doing active management and then doing other kinds of management. And I think it's really important I hope VHCB and ANR will remind people about that as we're learning about and sharing this with more of the Vermont public.
Thank you. That's a perfectly good handoff to what I was going to do, which was to say, if people want to take a quick look here, this is what the legislature told us that we are to produce. We're to give them recommendations. We understand that they'll authorize or not authorize, fund or not fund our recommendations, but they want a plan that achieves the vision and the goals, so the numeric goals of the act, but also the broad vision, and that it continues to serve ag lands, working forests, historic properties, recreation, etc. That achieving the vision and the goals uses conservation design as our framework. That we're supposed to continue to provide access to protected and conserved lands, but also to land-based enterprises, and that our recommendations should include recommendations that enhance our investments for working lands enterprise, for rural landowners, and for what is described as the broad conservation mission of the Secretary and VHCB. So I want to say we see and hear all of you, and that we think, as we produce this plan, what we want to have is a framework that provides recommendations to the legislature across that broad vision, and that where we also have worked together to say these are the kinds of priorities as we go forward. These are the things that are going to help us get to those goals and to have the kind of working and natural landscape that this act is predicated on. But UVA has an important place, public ownership has an important place, private ownership and stewardship has an important place. Conservation has an important place, but so does, whoever said big C and little c, thank you. I love that concept. But like, you know, all types of conservation are important under this plan. And we're supposed to say, where does it make sense to put deeds and restrictions into the land records? Where do other things, look like the best outcomes? So thank you all. We'll stop there for today. And, Zach, again, I think we've been trying to say that all along, is that we really think there's a place for, recommendations across this broad mission that Vermonters have undertaken together. And this was so successful this week, we'll think about ways that we can continue to have these informal discussions as we go forward, because it's really nice to see you all talking to each other and to us. And I hope everybody has a nice holiday next week. We'll get some news out the following week about the next opportunities to engage. So thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
all. Take care.